Hill. The chairman of that commission was a 4-star admiral and former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. With him that day on the commission was a rear admiral who had been the head of the entire legal department of the U.S. Navy. Part of the commission had been Marine General Ray Davis, the highest-ranking Medal of Honor recipient in the United States. They reported their findings that the Israeli attack on the USS Liberty had consisted of murder of American servicemen and that it consisted of an active war against the United States. They also reported that aspects of this attack had been ordered covered up by the White House and the Secretary of Defense, Robert McNamara. Statements of that gravity made by officials of that high rank would normally be very newsworthy. In fact, quite likely they would elicit investigations by Congress. And yet these were not even reported by CBS, by the New York Times, by the Washington Post. You can read them in the Congressional Record or on our website. The U.S. connection, in general, is a very important one that's being minimally reported to us. There are important international issues all over the world. There are issues of violence, of injustice, of oppression that are also extremely important. It is hard to keep up with all of them. But if we are connected to them, if our government is a part of them, then we need to know that, because then I feel it is obligatory for us to be informed about those issues for two reasons. One is the moral reason. If we are impacting lives abroad, then I feel we are morally obligated to know of our impact and to determine if we approve of it or if we don't. Secondly, there is the self-interest reason. If we are impacting lives abroad, human people, humanity, in a negative way, then there's a high probability that they will impact us in a negative way as well. For those reasons, we need to know if we have a connection to an international issue. And on Israel-Palestine, we certainly do. We give Israel over $7 million, at least $7 million per year of our tax money. This is far more than we give to any other country on earth. It is, in fact, and it costs us still more than what we give. Because typically, U.S. money to Israel is given right at the beginning of the year. There's no oversight whatsoever. Since we give it at the beginning of the year, and since we are operating at a deficit, that means that we have borrowed money that we are giving Israel. And we therefore are paying interest on money we no longer have. While Israel, that doesn't need to spend it right at the beginning, can bank it and draw interest on our money. In addition, we give a massive amount to Egypt, largely on behalf of Israel. When you count these two together, it's getting close to about 50% of our expenditures abroad. We need to know about those, and I think we need to consider whether we think that is a good and appropriate use of our tax money. But the American media almost never give us these figures. The history and context, as we know, are very important when you're trying to understand a conflict. We need to know the roots if we want to find a solution. However, these are almost never mentioned, and that's probably good, because when they are mentioned, we get the myths instead of the actual facts about the history of this very important conflict. It's important on any issue, I think, probably, but especially one that's controversial, to read widely. Because if you read only a few books, or one book, you don't know for sure that what may seem like a very scholarly book full of footnotes, maybe the author may have had an agenda. There may be a great deal of significant information that's being omitted or that we're getting skimmed. Therefore, on this issue, I think it's very important, and I've read widely from American, Israeli, British, Palestinian, Christian, Jewish, secular, Muslim, all sorts of different authors. And when you do that, it's not difficult to know the history of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The first thing I learned is that when I was born, there was no Israel. There was a region called Palestine. that had been there for a great many centuries. So where did the violence start? How do you find the roots of this? Well, you just go back to the late 1800s, and you find that the Palestine was inhabited by a fairly diverse population. About 80% Muslim, 15% Christian, 5% Jewish, all living in harmony without fighting one another. So where did the conflict come from? Well, to understand that, you don't go back in time, you just go across the world to Europe, where you find in the late 1800s a political ideology developing called political Zionism. The goal of this ideology was to create a Jewish state somewhere in the world. They considered Argentina, Uganda, and parts of North America before finally settling on Palestine for a Jewish state, and began to migrate there with the intention of creating a state that would be unwelcoming at least to 95% of the people inhabiting the land. Not surprisingly, we find that the indigenous people did not welcome their colonizers with open arms, especially when the immigration increased and became clear what was going on. There was violence between the different groups. Then as now, with innocent lives on all sides being lost, then as now the vast majority of those innocent lives being among the Palestinian Christians and Muslims.